Hi, everybody. Let's finish the Black Cauldron. We are on chapter 19. If you remember when we left off, King Morgant had taken Taran and his friends into the tent, and he had Eladier tied up, and Taran and his friends were like, oh my gosh. And that's where we left off. King Morgant said, tie up Taran and his friends. So chapter 19 is called The Warlord. Before the startled Taran could draw his blade, a guard seized him and quickly lashed his arms behind his back. The bard, too, was seized. Screaming and kicking, Elenwy fought vainly. For an instant, Gurgi broke loose from his captors and flung himself onto King Morgant. But a warrior struck him brutally to the ground, leapt aside the limp figure, and tied him tightly. "You traitor!" Elenwy shrieked. "Liar! You dare to steal—" "Silence her," Morgant said coldly. And in another moment, a gag muffled her cries. So a gag is what they put around your mouth since you can't speak. Frantically, Taran struggled to reach the girl's side before he was thrown down and his legs were secured with ropes. Morgant watched silently, his features fixed without expression. The guard stepped away from the helpless companions. Morgant gestured the warriors to leave the tent. Taran, whose head was still spinning with confusion and disbelief, strained against the ropes. "You're already a traitor," he cried. "Will you now be a murderer? We're under the protection of Gwydion. You will not escape his wrath." "I do not fear Gwydion," answered Morgant, "and his protection is worthless to you now, worthless indeed to all of Prydain. Even Gwydion is powerless against the Cauldron-born." Taran stared at Morgant in horror. "You would dare not use the Kraken against your own kinsmen, your own people? This is even more foul and treachery and murder." "Do you believe so?" Morgant replied. "Then you have more lessons to learn than that of obedience. The cauldron belongs to him who knows how to keep it and how to use it. It's a weapon ready for a hand. For years, Arwen was the master of the cauldron, yet he lost it. Isn't this proof that he was unworthy, that he didn't have the strength or the cunning to prevent it from slipping from his grasp? Eladier, that proud fool, he believed he could keep it. He's hardly fit enough to be cast into it." "What?" Taran cried. "You're going to set yourself to rival Arwen?" "To rival him?" Morgant asked with a hard smile. "No, to surpass him. I know my worth, though I have chafed in the service of lesser men than I. Now I see the moment is ripe. There are few," he continued haughtily, "who understand the uses of power, and few who dare to use it when it's offered to them. Such power was once offered to Gwydion," Morgant continued. "He refused it. I shall not fail to take it now that I have it. Shall you?" Remember, Gwydion was offered this power when he was held captive by Akron in the first book. So Morgant is referencing that Gwydion could have taken that all-powerful being back in the first book. And Morgant says, now I have the chance to be the most powerful person, and I'm going to take it. And now he's saying to Taran, you're going to have an offer. Will you refuse it? "I?" asked Taran, with a terrified glance at Morgant. King Morgant nodded. His eyes were hooded, but his falcon's face was keen and avid. "Gwydion has spoken of you," he said. "He told me little, but that little is of interest. You're a bold youth, and perhaps more than that. How much more? I don't know. But I do know you have no family, no name, no future. You can expect nothing. And yet," Morgant added, "you can expect everything." "I would never offer such a thing to Eladier," Morgant continued. "He's too prideful. He's weakest where he believes himself strong. Do you remember I told you? I know good metal. There's much that's possible with you, Taran of Caerdalban. And this is what I offer. Swear that you will serve me as your liege lord, and when the time is right, you shall be my war leader, second only to me in all of Prydain." So wow, what is Morgant offering Taran? He says, do you remember I told you I know good metal? He's saying, I can tell a person's personality. I can tell when a person's a good person. So he's offering Terran now to be second in command. He says, if you serve me, I will offer you, second rank in all of Prydain. Why are you offering me this? Terran cried. Why would you choose me? As I've said, Morgan answered, there is much you might achieve if the way was opened for you. Don't deny you've dreamed long of glory. It's not impossible for you to find it, if I judge you well. Judge me well, Terran flung back, and you would know that I would scorn to serve an evil traitor. I have no time to hear you vent your rage at me, Morgan said. Many plans must be made between now and dawn. I shall leave you with this to consider. Will you be the first among my warriors, or the first among my Cauldron-born? Put me in the cauldron then, Terran shouted. Cast me in it now, even as I live. You've called me a traitor, Morgan answered, smiling. Do not call me a fool. I, too, know the secret of the cauldron. Do you think I'd have the Kraken shatter before it even begins its work? Yes, he went on. I, too, have traveled to the marshes of Morva, long before the cauldron was taken from Anuvian. For I knew sooner or later Gwydion and I must move against Arwen, and so I prepared myself. Did you pay a price for the Kraken? Well, I too paid a price for the knowledge of its workings. I know how to destroy it, and I know how to make it yield a harvest of power. But you were bold nonetheless to hope to trick me, Morgan added. You fear me, he said, drawing close to Terran. There are many in Prydain who do. Yet you defy me. To dare that, there are few. This is rare metal indeed, ready to be tempered. So Morgan is admiring Terran's bravery. He says, there's a lot of people who are afraid of me and would never talk back to me. And he's like, you aren't afraid to talk back to me. And he says, that's impressive. Terran, of course, says, I would never join you. You're an evil traitor. And Morgan's telling us now that he traveled to the witches and found out the workings of the cauldron before any of this even happened, because he knew that at some point he and Gwydion would go and try to get the cauldron. He's also made Terran a deal. You either join me or you'll be the first to be thrown into the cauldron. So that's not a good bargain for Terran. Terran was about to speak, but the warlord raised his hand. Say no more. Instead, think carefully. If you refuse, you shall become a voiceless, mindless slave, without even hope of death to release you from your bondage. Terran's heart sank, but he raised his head proudly. If that's the destiny that's laid upon me, it'll be a harder destiny than you believe, Morgan said, his eyes flickering. A warrior does not fear to give up his own life. But will he sacrifice that of his comrades? Terran gasped with horror as Morgan went on. Yes, said the warlord. One by one your companions shall all be slain and fed to the Kraken. Who will it devour before you cry a halt? Will it be the bard? Or that shabby creature that serves you? Or perhaps the young princess? They shall all go in the cauldron before you, even as you watch. And then last, yourself. Weigh this carefully, said the warlord. I shall return for your answer. He flung his black cloak about his shoulders and strode from the tent. So now he's saying to Terran, and to make matters worse, I'm going to throw your friends in first, and you're going to watch if you don't join me, if you don't join my forces. Terran struggled against his bonds, but they held firm. He sank back and bowed his head. The bard, who'd been silent this whole while, heaved a sorrowful sigh. Oh, he said, in the marshes of Morva, if I'd only known, I would have asked Ordu to change me into a toad. I mean, at the time, I didn't really care for the idea, but as I think of it now, it's a happier life than being a cauldron warrior. At least there would have been dew circles to dance in as a toad. He's not going to succeed with this, Taryn said. Somehow we must find a way to escape. We dare not lose hope. I agree absolutely, Fluter answered. Your general idea is excellent. It's just the details that are lacking. Lose hope? By no means. A flam's always hopeful. And I intend to go on hoping, he added ruefully, even when they come and pop me into the kraken. Gurgi and Eladir still lay unconscious, but Elenwe had not ceased working furiously at that gag, and she at last succeeded in forcing it out of her mouth. Morgan, she gasped. He'll pay for this. Why, I thought I'd stifle. He might have kept me from talking, but he didn't keep me from listening. When he comes back, I hope he tries to put me in the cauldron first. He'll soon find out who he's dealing with. He'll wish he never thought of making his own cauldron born. Taryn shook his head. By then it'll be too late. We shall all be slain before we're taken to the kraken. No, there's only one hope. None of you should be sacrificed because of me. I've decided what I must do. Decided? Elenwe burst out. The only thing you have to decide is how we're going to escape from this tent. If you're thinking of anything else, you're wasting your time. That's like wondering whether to scratch your head when there's a boulder about to fall on it. This is my decision, Taryn said slowly. I will accept what Morgan offers. What? Elenwe exclaimed in disbelief. For a while, I thought you'd actually learn something from having Adon's brooch. How could you think to accept? I shall swear my allegiance to Morgan, Taryn went on. He shall have my word, but he shall not make me keep it. An oath given under the threat of death cannot bind me. This way, at least, maybe we'll gain a little time. Are you sure Morgan's warriors didn't strike you on the head and you didn't notice? Elenwe asked sharply. Do you imagine Morgan won't guess what you're planning? He has no intention of keeping his part of the bargain. He'll slay us all anyway. Once you're in his clutches, I mean more than you are, you won't get out of them. Morgan might have been one of the greatest war leaders in Prydain, but he's turned evil. And if you're trying to come to terms with him, well, you'll find that's worse than being a cauldron warrior. Although I admit, that's not a very attractive option either. Taryn was silent for a time. I fear you're right, he said, but I don't know what else we can do. We need to get out first, Elenwe advised. We can decide what else when the time comes. Somehow it's hard to think about where to run as long as your hands and feet are tied up. With much difficulty, the tightly bound companions struggled to get closer and tried to undo each other's ropes. The knots refused to yield, slipping from their numb fingers, and only bit more deeply into their flesh. Again and again the companions returned to their labors until they lay breathless and exhausted. So they scooted close together and they're trying to untie each other's ropes, but it's not working. Even Elenwe no longer had the strength to speak. They rested a while, hoping to gain new energy, but the night moved as a heavy tormented dream. And the moments they passed in fitful drowsing did nothing to restore them, nor did they dare lose too much precious time. Morning, Taryn knew, would come swiftly. The cold, gray trickle of dawn had already begun to seep into the tent. All night long as they toiled, Taryn heard the movements of the warriors in the clearing, the voice of Morgan crying harsh, urgent commands. Now he dragged himself painfully to the curtain, to the entrance of the tent, and he pressed his cheek against the cold ground, peering out of the tent. He could see very little, for the rising mist swirled above the turf. He could only make out shadows and shapes hastening back and forth. The warriors, he imagined, were gathering their gear, perhaps making ready to strike camp. A long, pitiful whinny came from the line of tethered horses, and he recognized it as Ismalash. So he can hear Eladir's horse whinnying in the line of horses. The kraken still squatted where it had been. Taryn could make out the dark, brooding mass, and it seemed to Taryn, in a flare of horror, that its mouth gaped greedily. Taryn rolled over and pulled himself back to his companions. The bard's features were pale. He appeared half dazed by fatigue and suffering. Elenwe raised her head and looked silently at Taryn. What? Murmured Fluter. Has the moment already come for us to say farewell? Not yet, Taryn said, though Morgant will be here soon, I fear, and then our time will be upon us. How's Gurgi doing? Oh, the poor thing, he's still unconscious, Elenwe answered. You know, leave him that way. It's kinder thus. Ellidyr stirred and groaned feebly. Slowly his eyes opened. He winced and turned his blood-stained, broken face to Taryn. And he studied Taryn for a time, as though without recognition. Then his torn lips formed into a familiar, bitter grimace. And so we're together again, Taryn of Caerdalbin, he said. I didn't expect us to meet so soon. Have no fear, son of Penlarcow, Taryn answered. It shall not be for long. Ellidyr bowed his head. For that, I'm truly sorry. I would like to make up the ill that I've done all of you. Would you have said the same thing if the cauldron were still in your hands? Taryn asked quietly. Ellidyr hesitated. I shall speak the truth. I don't know. The black beast you saw is a harsh master. Its claws are sharp. Yet I did not feel them until now. So Elidyr's saying, I wish I had more time to make up for the bad things that I've done to you. Elidyr's saying he's sorry, basically. He's also saying, Taryn also asked him, do you think if you still had the Kraken that you'd feel that way? And Elidyr's like, I don't know. That black beast, that jealousy, that rage, it was really strong in me, and I didn't realize it. But I tell you this, Ellidyr continued, trying to lift himself. I stole the cauldron out of pride, not evil, I swear to you, on whatever honor remains to me. I never would have used the cauldron. Yes, I would have taken your glory for my own, but I too was going to take the Kraken to Gwydion and offer it for destruction. Please, believe this much of me. Taryn nodded. I believe you, Prince of Penlarcow. And now, perhaps even more than you believe it yourself. A wind had risen, moaning through the trees and shaking the tent. The curtain blew back. Taryn saw the warriors forming in ranks behind the cauldron. And that's the end of chapter 19. So it looks like they're getting the cauldron ready to be used. And I'm going to record chapter 20 now so you can listen to that too.